And so I think when, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we are evaluated, it's mostly on how we are dealing with the negative impacts, the risks, rather than looking at the opportunities that we may harvest on the basis of sustainability by being a more sustainable company. And I think that's that's too bad that that is not looked more carefully at. And let me give you an example of that, because we just did a study in Brazil where I think 10 of our 11 business units are present. And if Brazil decided to move just 4% of the containers that are currently transported on trucks on the road to sea transport, coastal transport, then they would have 36,000 fewer car accidents every year. They would have 4.4 million tons of CO2 emissions less every year, and it would save them $125 million of road maintenance every year just by moving 4%. And by making that case, that's probably the biggest sustainability contribution that we can make as a company, rather than just making little things on our own within our own companies. Of course, we have to take care of our own people. We have to be a responsible company. There's no doubt about that. There's very high values within Maersk that are taking care of that as well, in systems and governance and all these things. But in terms of actually delivering sustainable innovation, it's outside the company, and it's through the kind of company we are, and we have to think differently about that. And I would love to have that being evaluated by investors and even pushing us. Are we doing that enough? Can we do more of that?
And this isn't something, is it, really, which an investor who is very interested in corporate responsibility, and there are some investors who really focus on that, but it's not something which they should be especially interested compared with other investors, because here is a real opportunity for the company. That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
and they need to understand the company and the business it's operating in. And Paul, how do you feel about what you're hearing from the companies here?
As Erica mentioned, when it comes to materiality, we are not looking at the kind of information which is each individual piece is precise and reliable and close to source enough that you could say, if I stood on the other side of the deal, I'd want to know it. So no single piece of information that we're seeing, all that we desire, is material and price sensitive. And I don't think companies are seeing it that way either, because if it was the case that the information that we're talking about did have that characteristic, it would be disclosed by companies through the Regulatory Information Service, and we just don't see that. So companies are not seeing the information around environment, society and governance as material. I think what can be useful to us is, of the information that's public, supposing 1/2 of all information about a company is public and the other half is private. Part of that 1/2 that is private is clearly strategic and therefore very sensitive to the company, and that's held privately and quite rightly too. But then there's another portion of private information which is just no one simply bothered to publish it, to report it, to put it down, to document it, to measure it. And that's the type of information which, whilst not material in its own right, when pieced together into the jigsaw, into the mosaic, we can come to a different conclusion than if we only had the public information available to us. That leads to a valuation which is more reflective of the true worth of the company, and therefore that then suggests a better allocation of resources via price signals going forward. So should we have more information around that type? Yes, I think we should, and I think it's up to companies to start revealing some of that information which heretofore have not been bothered to report.
But how, I'm coming to in a second, how are they supposed to know what this is? And this is an important point, isn't it? Because as far as I recall, the European regulation talks about to the extent necessary for the understanding of the company. They've got to show they comply with this. But how do they know? When you say you piece together bits of information and suddenly it becomes material, how do they know what to report? It's quite a big ask, isn't it?
I think Erica wants to.
Well, no, so you don't want to answer, but I mean,
well, Erica, would you like to answer that?
Would you like to answer?
Let me just give an example. So Coca-Cola, as an example, okay? So they have been noted to say that they have gotten on the order of 300 individual requests for data, all kinds of ESG data, in different formats, in different ways to ask the question. 300 different requests at least. There's one particular request that was over 600 person-hours to submit. So not only do I actually think there's too much information out there. In fact, I'll go back to some Harvard studies with Eccles. He would tell you that about 98% of the information that's used in investment processes is out there, is not even in published financial statements. Maybe 2% of what you use is there. But the vast majority of information floating around, there's a deluge of it, but companies don't know exactly what to say. And I think many great companies aspire to tell us what we want to know, but there are no standards, right? So that's why we're evolving towards what is most material. Again, I go to that sector-based issue, because frankly, there are more important drivers in some industries with some companies that would be not quite weighted as heavily. So we don't have a good answer to this yet, which is really problematic. Let me throw in one other item. I will tell you that in recent meetings in the U.S., at the SEC, some of the SEC commissioners, when having this very discussion, are most interested these days in how investors use the management discussions, the narrative information that's out there. It is so critically important if we really are going to get to understand the culture and the priorities of a particular organization when they start to operationalize what I call corporate sustainability, you know?
Yes, I lost the train of thought here for a moment, which is bad for a moderator. This is probably a moment where we ought to begin to think about the IRC. But I want to ask you a question before we go on to that, which is, that it sometimes seems to me that it is a really good starting point to look at the business model of the company, because if a company can write down its business model, then it's easier to understand from that what is material and what information needs to go around it. Would you agree with that? And do you think that do the majority of companies whose reports you look at actually write down their business model? Do you have the feeling that the boards know what the business model is in the majority of cases from reading the annual report, or not?
Good question, Paul. Why don't you take that one? Because
Oh, well, here we go. We're swapping around.
I will say one thing. We talked about, the idea of companies not just talking about risk and not just responding to risk, but discussing their opportunities. I would argue that if ESG analysis is done correctly, we're talking about both definitely expanding the opportunity set and managing the risks. So if companies think about their mission statements, maybe the idea, and now I'll go to think about Professor Porter on a 5 forces kind of analysis of strategy. I think we can do better to make the mission and the business strategy consistent with looking at both opportunities and risk, but on the financial statement.
Paul, you've had it batted. You batted one to Erica. She's batted it back to you. What do you think?
I'm not too sure that we at Nest would read too much into the business model itself. We're a very, very broad, diversified investor, and we can pick up some understanding of the business model by going outside of the annual report. I think we're very, very interested in the company told as a single story. Now, that will include the business model, but it means more than just the business model. It's the single story that the board of directors believes the company is. We want to know about what worries the board. So these are the types of issues we really want to hear about. The business model itself, yes, I think from a Porter's external forces analysis, yes, of course, that's one of the boxes to tick. But I wouldn't say that we either want one of two things. We either want to know about a company as a coherent whole, in which case we want to know about some of the private information which is not price sensitive, so we can get a truer picture, or we're looking at a more intrusive, focused analysis around some area of detail, diversity, living wage, pension-friendly policies, that we think chime with who we are as an investor And for that also, we don't necessarily feel we need the business model. So I would probably say for us, it's not something that's up there as top.
I must say, I have to say, if I can just sort of interject from the FRC's point of view, I think we have begun to feel over the last few years that it is an important distinguishing feature that boards are able to explain in a page or so, or possibly less, what their company is about. And it's quite interesting, when I read annual reports, there is a big difference between the ones which can and the ones which can't. And the ones which can are usually doing better, but it follows, if they can explain what they're about, that they can give you a much better prioritized vision of the risks and the opportunities. And so I mean, I have this feeling that actually the business model may be rather more important than you're suggesting. Erica is nodding at this point. Do you want to come back in?
Not only that, but I think if you even net it out to a corporate tagline or a logo, I think even that could be important. When we think about my own company, UBS, you know, we will not rest. Okay. We will not rest until, and there are many things, but I'll tell you what our tagline was. This is probably 20 years ago, before I joined the firm. And this doesn't flow off the tongue easily, but the tagline was, the relentless pursuit of our clients' success. That somebody told me that before I joined the firm, because I really like that. If my company is about supporting the financial, the economic well-being of our clients, I think that is really a great mission. And are we consistent in that mission all through what we do and all of our people? And it's really easy to say, you know, we are a company that is in pursuit of our clients' financial prosperity. That's nice. You know, so I think maybe companies can do better, even in a tagline, articulating their mission.
Let's put it to the test here. I'm sorry, this is a surprise question. Annette, I mean, what's your company about?
Oh, you could have prepared me for this one.
Don't worry, perhaps it was a bit unfair.
We're a conglomerate.
That says everything.
Yeah, so we are a conglomerate within oil and gas, shipping, transportation, logistics, port locations, and retail.
Right.
So many different business models, I have to say.
Actually, that is a legitimate point, because when we have discussed this with companies in the FRC, they do say if you're a conglomerate, it's much harder to define the business model than if you're basically in a sort of single area. So, Suzanne, it might be a bit easier for you.
Well, it's super easy for me. We're a focused healthcare company, focused in very few therapy areas, so we're all about helping people live better lives.
Right. So that's opportunity, but it's, I mean, it's easier, I think, having got that focus, possibly to define the risks and the opportunities and talk about them.
Well, I'm not sure if it's easier. It was easier for me to explain what the business is all about, as you asked me. But I think back to Paul's comment about the business model. I think it's a good exercise to have to explain your business model and your strategy in a very few couple of pages in an annual report, even if it will be the same story year and year on. What we've been doing in the past years is actually that we've been using it to also refine that story, because my mission is all about integration of where decisions are being made, how they are being made. So it's about integrated investments as well as integrated management and integrated thinking. So what we've also been doing is really to be able to present that in a more integrated strategy. And we are not there yet. But we've been making, year on year, we've been making what, from my perspective, is improvements to that narrative, to that storyline that we are conveying. And I think back to what the Commission is asking companies to do is precisely to be able to articulate what are your negative impacts and then get it over with. Because we have to be able to account for that.